Okay, in this video we will be learning about functions and a quick kind of little recap on locality. So one way to learn about it is we're going to make a function, and inside the function we are going to create a vehicle on this trigger as well as on this marker to show both ways on how to do that, as well as both the regular syntax here and with the alternative syntax. And on top of that, we're going to be learning how to pass in parameters to that function and get a return value from a function as well. So we can kind of check and see if the function succeeded in its task, or if there's a random chance of something happening, you can figure out what happened, like option A or option B, and make a decision with your script accordingly to take care of whichever, well, value it returned. So to start out, we're going to start with just the marker. We named it spawn marker, and I've already just laid these up here so I remember the names. Now we're going to go ahead and look here at the functions, what the syntax is going to be. So it's just my variable equals, then you're opening and closing curly braces with your code inside, just like with everything else. So we'll call it createVehicle func equals. Now in here we're going to want our code. Now this is a local function, as you can tell just by the underscore. So if we were to, let's say, try to call this, such as call createVehicle function, this would work because it's in the same file. However, if we tried to do this from test.sqf, it would not work because it does not know what createVehicle function is. So now just to test it, hint in function, let's go ahead and save it and start it. It prints out in function. Now if we were to call this before the function is created like this, you should be able to guess what's going to happen. Error, undefined variable and expression, createVehicle function. Because with inside of all event scripts, I believe it's all of them, this is considered a scheduled environment. So pretty much it's going to run from top to bottom. So it's going to run this before it runs this. And you can't call something that does not exist yet. Which is why, just like if you look at C++, for example, we have our main function. And if we want to create another function to call from main, we have to either make it above the main function so that it's read and can be called accordingly, or make a little prototype above the main function and then have our actual function, the code that we want, below the main function. So it's just got to be declared somewhere so that it can call it, if that makes any sense. So start top to bottom. Okay, now we have our class name of the vehicle we're going to spawn, which is regular hatchback, and we have the name of the marker we want to spawn it on. So if we go over here to create vehicle in the wiki, we see type, which would be this here, the name of the vehicle, class name by the way, create vehicle, then the position. So I'm just going to go ahead and add a handler, just name it VH equals, then you want the type. So the type is always going to be a string. So go ahead and put the class name of the vehicle inside the string, then do create vehicle. Now it's where we want the position. So we want to get the position of spawn marker. So we have get marker POS, and a marker is always a string, so spawn marker. Now when this runs, it should have a hatchback that spawns on top of the marker, just like so. Now if we want to make this using a trigger, which is going to be the exact same as a 3D object, we need to get the position above terrain level just like we did in the previous video here. So we go POS equals get POS ATL for above terrain level, then the name of the trigger or the object, which is spawn trigger in our case. So we can go ahead and get rid of this. And which I do recommend you watch the previous few videos on get and set position, you know that this returns an array of the x, y, and z. So, and it's stored in position. So in order to get that, we just make our opening and closing square brackets, and we separate it by 2 commas. So in the first one, we're going to have position select 0, which selects the first element of the array, which is position. Then we have position select 1 and position select 2. So now this should spawn a little bit farther to the right, and just like so, it spawned it on the trigger. Now, as for the alternative syntax, which, by the way, it should be noted if you're going to be doing this a lot, I don't know how much truth that there is to it, but Killzone Kid, which I do trust, states that is the same, if not faster, than the alternative syntax. So in theory, with what he's saying, just doing as simple as what we just did with here should be the same and possibly faster than the alternative syntax to actually create the code. So we're going to go ahead and clear this and do the exact same thing, but with the alternative syntax. And this can be pretty much the same, just, well, differently how you write it, and you get a couple more little options here, such as placement and special. So we go ahead and make our handler, just like before, and you can see it says create vehicle. And if you remember before, the type is the class name of the vehicle. So just like that, then our position. Now the position is going to be just for instance, if we did get mark position, just like before, or if we want to use the trigger's position that is stored in position, we just have to get the x, y, and z coordinates. So we're going to go ahead and do opening and closing square brackets, and do just like before, position select 0, position select 1, and position select 2. Now it's going to ask for markers, which it says here is an array. We're not going to be doing that, so just make it empty. Then it's going to take in placement, a number, which it says if a vehicle is placed inside a circle with a given position as center and the placement as its radius, we don't necessarily want that. We want it to be exactly on the trigger, so we're going to do 0. And then you see special, which is just, it's going to be a string, so we don't want to add anything new, so we're just going to do none. So this should create a vehicle on the trigger again. Yep, just like so. Now, we can make this a little simpler. We can have our own little function that creates a vehicle for us for any vehicle that we want, and all we have to do is just call the function, and it can spawn multiple different types of vehicles. So I'm going to actually go ahead and Google a couple class names real quick. I don't remember where they even are. Nope. Is this all just weapons? Nope, here we have vehicles. Wait. Where's the class name? Maybe he has some listed. Good enough. Why not spawn a hummingbird? I can't copy and paste it. So we're just going to go ahead and make a little hint here. So we can use that as the example here in a second. Now with calling functions, they can take in parameters just like SQF files. Like if we went to go use exccvm for test and we wanted to pass in the name of the player, and how we would get that is just this select 0. It's the exact same way. So you can see here, it kind of gives an example. Parameter 1, parameter 2, then call the function. So we want to pass in the class name of a vehicle that we want. So just like before, it's always in square brackets. We're going to pass in the hatchback class name. And we're going to store that inside the variable vehicle. So vehicle equals this select 0. And we're going to change the type here to vehicle. Now when we run this, it should do the exact same thing. It's going to create the hatchback, just like that. And now we're going to pass in the helicopter class name, assuming it's right. And it should spawn in the helicopter, just like so. And we were able to do that all by simply changing how we called the function. So we could have multiple of these function calls with different parameters, and it would create the same exact, well, it would create this on the exact same thing in the exact same space, but it would create a different vehicle. So this is going to be useful if you have like a little shop where the player can purchase a vehicle or something like that. You just would need to obviously alter it and check if there's a vehicle blocking the spawn point, for example, so you don't have a big old explosion. Now, I mentioned we're going to be getting the return value of a function to test if you had like a 50-50 chance for something to spawn. And if it worked, print out whatever, we'll just use hints for example, print out hint vehicle created, if not hint vehicle did not create. So you can see here in the examples, looking for, here's a good one. Alright, so it calls the same exact function. This first one here sends in the variable kaboom, and it sets it return me to fail. So if my name equals kaboom, then set return me to pass. And then at the very end, just like in C++, if you do return then the variable name, it's the exact same thing. Just the last variable in the function is going to be what is returned. So you have to make sure you have this pretty much the variable you want to be the return value at the very end. And you can kind of see it gives a written example where it said it. The value of the last executed statement in a function is returned to the calling instance, being my called variable. So what we can do is did vehicle create equals, then it's going to call the function, and we're going to get our return value when we make it here in a second. So we have, we're going to go ahead and make a little if statement to do our 50-50 chance. So if 50 is greater than random 100, yeah, it should be right, then it will spawn our vehicle. So there's a 50-50 chance that it will create the vehicle. We also need to make our return variable. So we're going to go ahead and just define it with private, then call it, we'll just name it return, and go ahead and set it to false. So if the vehicle does get created, we're going to set return equals true. Keep in mind return can be anything you want name-wise. Then, as it stated before, we need to have it at the very end of the function. So we're just going to do return. So now we're going to have our little check here. So did vehicle create, then else so if it did create, hint vehicle was created. If it didn't create, hint vehicle was not created. So now when we go to test it, vehicle was not created, and as you can see there's no vehicle spawned anywhere. Try it again, and vehicle was created is what it prints out because it did spawn the vehicle. So it's just that random chance, and you can do whatever you want with the data that you get. So if you want to have a varying path that has a random chance of happening, you can do something kind of like this. So just something that should be pretty useful. And that's a basic idea on functions. And I didn't really touch much on locality, but it's pretty self-explanatory. Anything local is local to what it's created in. Just kind of use that as the general guide until you work your way up a little farther. And that'll be all for this one.